In 1998, Halloweentown premiered on the Disney Channel, following a girl who discovers her family hails from a village full of monsters. But there's a whole lot going on here that you probably didn't notice the first time around. Here are the things about Halloweentown you only notice as an adult. Kids rarely notice the movie credits, but if you're sitting down to watch Halloweentown as an adult, then you might just notice a surprising name show up. Less than a minute into the movie, Halloweentown proudly announces that it has music by Mark Mothersbaugh. Just in case the name isn't ringing a bell, Mothersbaugh is probably best known as the co-founder and frontman for Devo. In the years since Whip It made the band a household name, he's had a pretty prolific career composing film scores. He's worked on pretty much every kind of film that requires a quirky, memorable soundtrack, from Thor Ragnarok to Pitch Perfect 2 to the Lego Movie. However, his work might be most recognizable from his many collaborations with director Wes Anderson. So yeah, it turns out Halloweentown is actually even more awesome than you thought it was when you were a kid. Unless, of course, you were the kind of kid who kept track of what Disney Channel movies were being scored by the guy from Devo, which makes you even weirder than most of this movie's characters. Marnie Piper, the heroine of Halloweentown, is one of the most authentic child characters to ever make it to the small screen. But that is one heck of a double-edged sword. As a kid, you absolutely relate to her when she insists that she's not just a child.
I'm 13, okay? I'm practically a grown-up.
And as an adult, you cringe because you remember that feeling all too well. Marnie's most cringeworthy moment? After her grandmother Aggie arrives with a magical bag of costumes, Marnie gleefully puts on a pointy hat and makes a pretty dubious declaration.
I'm a Wiccan!
Considering that Wiccans are members of an actual religion and not just people dressing up in costumes, that may be a little offensive. But the Halloween-obsessed Marnie has clearly learned that Wiccan is a more proper and preferred term for certain people than witch, and in her head, that means that's the word she should use when describing one. Not only does this effortlessly show how much she doesn't know about the magical world, but it's also exactly the kind of childhood pretentiousness that you don't even recognize you had until you're grown up. It's established early on that despite her mother's best efforts, Marnie loves all things monsters, magic, and Halloween. And this obsession has allowed her to learn a whole lot of relatively odd stuff. Even so, it's pretty surprising that when she learns about Halloweentown, her very first question is to ask if they have any Dybbuks and banshees. Most people are familiar with banshees, the mourning spirits of Irish mythology whose piercing cries herald the death of a loved one. But if you're not up on your Jewish folklore, Dybbukim might be a bit more obscure. The short version is that they're malevolent spirits who possess the living. Considering that Grandma Aggie is chatting about relatively friendly Halloween standards like goblins and skeletons, the only thing weirder than Marnie going for deep-cut monsters is Aggie's response that these unholy tormentors exist in her home world of Halloweentown by the dozens. Yikes. While Halloweentown's population includes some of the more obscure entries of the monster manual, most of the creatures we see are pretty familiar. There's a vampire, for instance, whose debilitating toothache gives Marnie one of the ingredients she needs for a spell. As a kid, that makes perfect sense. Of course there are vampires. They're the most famous Halloween monsters. Grow up a little though, and you can't help but wonder, what exactly do those vampires eat? We know that there are plenty of misconceptions about monsters, but if we know anything about vampires, it's that they drink the blood of the living. So are there just volunteers offering up their jugulars every day at lunchtime? Do the people with the gourds for heads have pumpkin spice blood? Or maybe that's the real reason why there's a bus that travels from Halloweentown to the mortal world on the one night where a vampire wouldn't look suspicious. That way they can enjoy the buffet before heading back home. There's a lot of weird stuff going on in Halloweentown, but the movie really shifts its bizarreness into high gear when Marnie and her siblings start gathering up ingredients for their magic spell. That's when we get the inexplicable scene of a ghost who's trying to lose weight, which implies that this departed soul is both physically present and mutable in the same way as living bodies. The weirdest part, however, is when Sophie grabs a sheet and starts doing what we can assume is an extremely offensive impression of a ghost and gets an unexpected reaction.
Hey kid, I don't appreciate stereotypes like that, alright?
This line is delivered with the wariness of someone who's had to deal with this a lot. As a kid, the goofy contrast of Sophie's sheet ghost and the genuine article is a forgettable gag. But as an adult, we now have the knowledge that this delightful magical world also has racism, so that's fun. At first glance, Halloweentown seems like a whimsical, downright idyllic place full of friendly zombies and wisecracking skeletons. As an adult, however, you can spot a few subtle hints that all is not well. There's a cop who walks by giving Marnie and Dylan a mean look while swinging around his nightstick, clearly looking to bust some heads, which indicates that there's some kind of crime going on beyond Kalabar's sinister scheme. Even more upsetting, though, is when Aggie's friend Harriet mentions that she's been volunteering at the local headless shelter, baking muffins that its residents can't eat. No heads means no mouths, after all. The whole thing is played for laughs, but for the grown-up audience, this has some disturbing implications. Being decapitated is apparently such an uncontrolled epidemic in Kalabar's town that it requires shelters, where its residents are tended to by cheerful volunteers who laugh at their inability to eat. But hey, no heads means no mouth, so at least you can't hear their endless tortured screams. There's an even weirder part of the scene with the ghost in a sweatbox, when he casually drops a line with some truly alarming metaphysical implications.
Woo, is it getting hot in here? Hades was nothing compared to this.
There's a lot to unpack here, but the biggest thing to note is that in the universe of Halloweentown, there is a Hades, the shadowy, lifeless underworld where dead souls reside for eternity. Considering that the ghost mentions the heat, though, it's safe to assume that he's not talking about the silent, eternally unchanging underworld of Greek mythology. Instead, he's likely talking about what most of us would just call hell, and is simply following the weird rules set by the Disney Channel in 1998 by not calling it by its name. The weirdest thing that we see in the montage of Halloweentown's residents is definitely the goblin who is just a straight-up Franciscan friar. As a kid, you probably didn't notice, or if you did, you probably just assumed that he was on his way to chill with Halloweentown's version of Robin Hood. For adults, however, it raises some truly perplexing questions. If there's a Franciscan monk in Halloweentown, that means that the Catholic Church has at least some sort of presence there, too. So, is there a bishopric of Halloweentown? Does the Pope's authority extend to the pocket dimension of Halloweentown, or does Halloweentown have its own Pope? Does this Halloweentown Pope have a pumpkin head, and if so, is his mitre extra large to fit on top of it, or is it normal-sized and just perched there hilariously? Is Kalabar the Halloween Pope? Was St. Christopher, who is often depicted as having a dog head, one of the dog-headed people that we see in Halloweentown? These questions need answers. So we know that in Halloweentown, hell exists, and the Catholic Church probably does too. We also know that Halloweentown is populated by ghosts and skeletons who occasionally make references to having once been alive, and that at least one of them has been to Hades before moving to Halloweentown. It's tempting to look at all the ghosts and mummies and figure that Halloweentown, with its wonky time and placid small-town aesthetic, is something like a purgatory with goblins. Put all of those facts together, though, and it's clear that we're dealing with some sort of after-afterlife, where souls can find some measure of peace after suffering through their punishment, but also an immortal Debbie Reynolds is there? Honestly, it might be worth it to just consider this movie to be a lost fourth chapter of Dante's divine comedy Inferno, Purgatorio, Paradiso, and Halloweentown. Part of Kalabar's evil plot for dimensional domination involves getting Luke, a local goblin, to do his bidding as a minion, because apparently getting a juvenile delinquent on his side is the first step to conquering the world. Kalabar convinces Luke to join up by giving him the handsome looks of a standard-issue Disney Channel teen. The lesson here is that it's what's on the inside that counts, but when you're an adult who's seen that moral play out a million times, you might notice that it doesn't really make sense here.
I was kind of hungry, but then I smelled something stinky. It must have been the big cheese.
Here's the big issue. What beauty standards is Luke trying to live up to? He's a Halloweentown native, and that place doesn't exactly seem to feature the same ideals about good-looking people that the movie's mortal world might have. Like, there are people with jack-o'-lanterns for heads and full-on dogmen running around. Even at his most goblinish, you'd think Luke would at least believe himself to be odder looking than the literal rotting corpse selling brooms down the road. Aggie's meddling with Gwen's parenting may be all too familiar to some adult Halloweentown viewers. As a kid watching the Disney Channel movie, you're definitely 100% on Aggie and Marnie's side. How could Gwen keep Marnie from reaching her magical potential? But as an adult, you're almost certainly way more sympathetic to Gwen. Part of growing up is learning that you need to get some distance from your parents and to live your own life. And it's really annoying when they keep trying to control your life because they disapprove of your choices. It's even worse if you have kids and they keep undermining your authority, doing things that you've explicitly told them not to do. Gwen's not necessarily right about keeping her daughter from developing her magic powers, but her annoyance with Aggie's meddling and boundary crossing is definitely understandable. Obviously, Marnie is the star of Halloweentown, and she's the focus of Aggie's attention as she tries to lead her to her witchy destiny. Aggie even crafted and printed up an elaborate storybook for the sole purpose of having Marnie see herself as a witch. Sophie, the youngest, also gets plenty of screen time devoted to her innate magical talent. Dylan, though? Aggie never even mentions that he might have the potential for magic, even though he's as much a part of the Cromwell line as his sisters. You'd think Aggie would have wanted to win over all of her grandkids, especially since Dylan is also approaching his own 13th Halloween. It's not like Dylan should be the focus of the film, though. Really, a series of movies about a young boy with glasses who learns that he's a wizard from a powerful family and is whisked off to a magical land where he fulfills a prophecy? Who'd want to watch that? There's no getting around it, Kalabar is a bad guy. He wants to conquer the world with an army of bloodthirsty monsters, and he tries to kill Marnie and her family. Here's the thing, though. He's also kinda right. Even if Halloweentown residents had once succumbed to their evil impulses in the mortal world, they were still driven out of their home dimension into a separate world where they had to isolate themselves. They've certainly chilled out quite a bit in the years since the so-called dark times, so why wouldn't they be able to return to the other world? Why shouldn't they be allowed to go home? If Kalabar had actually put the potential move back to the humans' world to a vote as Halloweentown's mayor, instead of disguising himself as a shadow demon and trying to kill all of his constituents, there's a good chance he might have been able to win the whole population over to his side. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more list videos about your favorite holiday movies are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.